Hello and welcome to another edition of Beyond the Hype. I'm your host, Alfred Edmond Jr., Senior Vice President and Executive Editor at Large for Black Enterprise, and we have a really important and powerful discussion for you today. Listen, we know that the mission of Black Enterprise is Wealth for Life, and as part of that, we're talking about growing Black businesses, entrepreneurs who can create jobs and create economic activity to contribute to the goal of closing the wealth gap in America. That's been the mission of Black Enterprise from day one, and it's kind of the core of all of our content since we were founded in 1970. Here on Beyond the Hype, we interview all kinds of people, from actors and entertainers to athletes to comedians to executives at corporate America. But today's guest is at the core of this conversation. So let me say before I introduce him, this episode of Beyond the Hype is brought to you by Nationwide, and this guest is a really special guest. He's the chairman, president, and CEO of Perkins Management Services Company. He's also head of Black Titan Investment Corp. But you will recognize this brand maybe more than any other. He is the owner of Fuddruckers, the world's greatest hamburgers franchise. He is the first African American to own a national hamburger franchise system. Let me make it clear. He doesn't own individual outlets. He owns the systems that sells the outlets. So it's a really significant booking for this show. I'm so glad to have him on. Please welcome to the show, Mr. Nicholas Perkins.
Thank you so very much for having me. I'm absolutely delighted to be here.
You know, when I first heard about you, now I know Fuddruckers. I remember my first time having a Fuddruckers burger. I know I was in Wisconsin back when Black Enterprise was still a printed magazine. Our magazine was printed in Wisconsin, and I'd never heard of Fuddruckers. And our host at our printing company was like, "Oh, we're going to take you to lunch. You're going to go to this place called Fuddruckers." And I'm like, "I don't know anything about a Fuddruckers, you know." But you know, when somebody's going to treat you to a meal, you just graciously accept. And man, I ain't never had a hamburger experience like that before that time. I have to admit, I was like, "This is how they do hamburgers out here," because that's not from a franchise chain. Like, again,
sure.
I've been at like specialty, restaurants that have their, but to have a franchise burger that was that robust and it just didn't feel like the run of the mill fast food burger.
That's right.
I just never forget that experience. So to find out, not only found out earlier this year that you owned the system, again, not the franchises, but the system that sells the franchises, it was very, very fascinating to me. So tell me the story of your companies and how you came to acquire Fuddruckers.
Wonderful. So again, I'm absolutely honored and delighted to be here. I have to tell you just a very quick story that I was going through my garage the other day, and I have mountains of Black Enterprise magazines, the printed version, of course, that I've read since I was, I want to say senior in high school is when I started reading and building my collection. And I was just going through all of those magazines that I had just had over the years, and I've got a full library. So it's absolutely an honor for me to have the opportunity to interview with you today and to talk with Black Enterprise about, what I've been able to accomplish. So this is truly a dream come true. I am a visionary. So just the whole notion of becoming an entrepreneur, I have to say, started in my grandmother's very humble kitchen with just the basics of me, being a big guy who loved her cooking, never really understanding that it could become a business. And when I finished playing football in high school, I got a scholarship to Fayetteville State University. And I went to Fayetteville State on football scholarship, and then I also worked in the cafeteria. And I learned that meal preparation was really a business. And so I determined that I was able to merge my two passions, and that was food and business. And I knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I had been inspired for years by many of the people that I read about in Black Enterprise magazine. And now I found something that I felt like I could be good at. And so I went to work in higher education food services. One of my best friend's parents owned a contract food management business, and I got to learn all of the ins and outs of that. And, I had to work my way through undergraduate school, and I was a breakfast cook at a small mental health hospital in my hometown of Fayetteville, North Carolina. And there, later on, I learned that that food service contract would be coming out for bid. So I knew the ins and outs of it, and I submitted a proposal. I was 24 years old, and was successful in that pursuit, and that's what launched the company. So I was a breakfast cook. I was the food delivery guy. I was the janitor, whatever it took in the very beginning for me to be able to start my own business. And that's how Perkins Management Services started. Then I went into the 8A Business Development Program. It took 2 years to get my first federal government contract. And we went to work for the United States Coast Guard, the Department of Homeland Security. And from there, it was history because we really cut our teeth in cafeteria management at that point. In 2009, Dr. Lawrence Richardson, who was the president of Morris College in Sumter, South Carolina, provided me with my very first contract at a historically black college and university at Morris College. And that's what launched us into higher education food services. My niche really and focus has been in and around providing cafeteria management services for our nation's historically black colleges and universities. On November the 12th, my company turned 18 years old. It doesn't seem like it's been 18 years, but it has this year. And 13 of those 18 years that we've been in business, we've been focused on historically black colleges and universities. I wanted to find a way to diversify the company. My goal was to keep Perkins Management Service as a 100% minority owned, independent contract food management business. I saw that there were or many other minority companies out there, but they were aligned with, large majority companies. In my personal opinion, didn't feel like they were really adding anything to the market. Many of them gave the appearance of subcontractors, and I didn't want to introduce myself and my firm to the market in that way. I wanted us to be a competitor. I wanted us to have very key differentiators and what separated us and what allowed us to compete against these multi-billion dollar multinational corporations. And so we found our niche. Now it's been a heavy lift in trying to grow and compete against these big corporations. However, we found that we've been able to kind of hold our own, if you will, in this very competitive space. And so as I look to diversify the company, in 2019, I had come across an article that was written that Luby's Incorporated was going to be looking to divest its assets. And I decided that I wanted to investigate that a little bit more. And so I began to, reach out and make contacts with folks that I knew that could potentially walk me down this path because all the growth that I have experienced has been organic growth. This would be an acquisition, nothing that I had ever done before. And I knew that I had read about Reginald Lewis, who's and also a personal hero of mine, and I began to start thinking about the Beatrice acquisition. And, so I was introduced to Blair Walker, who had actually written Why Should White Guys Have All the Fun? And Blair was a person that I had come to respect. We began working together on a book that I wanted to write about my life and pursuit as an entrepreneur. And Blair had introduced me to Lloyda Lewis, and she became a mentor to me, reached out and helped to point me to people who could be helpful to me during this particular process. And so as we began to study, what the things that would need to happen in order to be able to pull off an acquisition, I said to myself, my goodness, this is going to be a very heavy undertaking. So I reached out to Mr. Ed Brown over at Brown Capital Management, and I went to go and see Mr. Brown and his partner, Keith Lee, and talk with them about what it was that I wanted to take on. I had no idea that the type of capital that just goes into just due diligence to determine whether it's a go no go. It's a significant investment, and I began to understand better why these types of opportunities have not been available to minorities in the way in which it is in other aspects. And so I had support. Mr. Brown Mr. Lee, Mrs. Lewis, and Blair were there with me throughout the entire process. I sent a note to the CEO of Luby's at the time, Mr. Chris Pappas, in 2019, and told him that I wanted to come and introduce myself to him. The goal was for me to just make my interest known. And at the time, I wanted to position myself to be able to compete for Luby's Incorporated. So the goal initially was not, just for Fuddruckers. I was looking to acquire the entire portfolio. And it wound up that my persistence led me to be able to acquire Fuddruckers as a part of the transaction, as opposed to Luby's. And Fuddruckers was, I just never gave up. I mean, there were times where they had gone exclusive with other companies, and I was trying to pull the financing together. I mean, from banks to venture capitalists to African American business people that I had went to, and I just was unable to get anybody to bite because of the pandemic, and just COVID-19 in general, and all of the challenges that came along with that made it difficult, for anybody to have an appetite, for a transaction like this. So, I was, just a little, disappointed at times when I just kept hearing the word no, but I just kind of hung on the sidelines. And I remember when the deal that they had with one of the other entities was expiring. And it expired, like, I want to say at midnight, whatever, that night. And, I just woke up, I just threw a Hail Mary, and I asked for, a transaction that would allow for a seller finance deal. And that's how I was able to get it done. I had to put down a certain amount of cash, and I asked them to take a note back, on the balance, and they were agreeable to that. And we were able to structure the deal that way. And so it taught me that you really never give up. And although it may not seem like the most ideal set of circumstances, you just never know. You just never know. And so I learned through that process that persistence does pay off, and you never tell yourself no. You you put it out there, and you never know what may wind up happening.
Nicholas, you tell your story, and listen, I'm going to tell my audience, I promise you, I didn't set all this up. So they're hearing, you're talking to Miss Lloyda Lewis. Just so you know, and most
Hmm.
of my audience knows, the original cover story on the TLC Beatrice deal was written by me. I authored that cover story. I mean, if you
Outstanding.
can see the cover hanging up on the
Yep.
wall over my shoulder,
Yes.
I'd been at Black Enterprise maybe 6 months. It was like my first big story at
Yes.
Black Enterprise. And so obviously I knew Blair Walker. I know Blair Walker from that
Yes.
association. I know Mrs. Lewis and her daughters very well because of that association. For the time before Mr. Lewis unfortunately passed prematurely,
Right.
I did every article. I did 2 cover stories in every article for Black Enterprise and Mr. Lewis. Um, and then you mentioned Eddie Brown of Brown Capital Management, obviously
Yes.
another icon that we've covered at Black Enterprise over the years. And I'm leading into one of your companies called Black Titan Investment, and you noticed as you came into the studio that I have A.J.
Yeah.
Gaston over my shoulder that was the book
Absolutely.
Black Titan. And as we get into the conversation, I definitely want you to talk about him as an inspiration. But we hear, and it's always a wonderful thing to hear Black entrepreneurs say, Black Enterprise, inspired me, motivated me, encouraged me when I was discouraged. But to see someone whose story is so intimately integrated with, many of the stories that I and my colleagues have written over the last 30 years is really, really rewarding.
Hmm.
Talk to me about the A.G. Gaston connection. Someone who I got the pleasure to get to know and meet personally before he passed.
My goodness.
He
I
lived
would have loved.
he lived past age 100, so
Yes.
he was still active and sharp practically till the end.
Yes.
But talk to me about his particular space in your story as an inspiration to the point where you named your investment corporation Black Titan, which is the title of
Yes.
Mr. Gaston's autobiography.
Yes. I got to tell you, this is a very special piece for me because Dr. Gaston instantly became my hero once I got my hands on that book. I stumbled across it, in fact, at Books a Million one day. And I'll never forget, the cover of the book. I saw the Black Titan, and I saw this, this gentleman on the cover with a slick hat and overcoat and a suit, that just looked accomplished. And so as I began, to just kind of flip through the pages, I said, "Oh my goodness! I mean, this Alabama's first black millionaire." And then I started to think about, because I've always been a student of the African American Civil Rights Movement, and I began to, as I was reading the overview, understand the time period for which Dr. Gaston's business enterprises were established and lived through. And I said, this seems like something that I really need to read. So I purchased the book, and I absolutely could not put it down. It was in 2004 when I first read the book, and I was just getting started in business on my own. And I was reading the story, and to understand how a man was able to establish need-based businesses during a time where it was just, from the Great Depression through the Civil Rights Movement through and being in one of the most thoroughly segregated cities of America. What it showed me was that if there is a person who can overcome all of those obstacles, I really don't have any excuse not to make it, right? And I said, now those were incredible circumstances that while we will deal with ebbs and flows of the economy, we didn't have to deal with so much blatant racism and all of the odds that Dr. Gaston had to face. And in spite of that, was still able to single-handedly establish an African American middle class. That to me was what a social entrepreneur really is, and it taught me the power of entrepreneurship. And for me, it was always about the why. The why for me. And many people say, and I've heard this all the time, you never fall in love with a business. A business is an asset. An asset, always can be liquidated or should be sold, et cetera, et cetera. And while I understand business very well, I teach it at Howard as an adjunct professor. The reality for me is that I see a business as a tool. I see it the way in which Dr. Gaston saw it, and that was to be able to create sustainable business enterprises that fill the needs of people and provided as many sustainable jobs as possible, and leverage that economic power to bring about very impactful social economic change. And that is what I see myself as an entrepreneur. And people call me a race man all the time. And I think what they mean by that is that my involvement with the National Urban League, I'm a trustee on the board of the Urban League, and my businesses primarily focusing on HBCUs are in marginalized communities. Many of the people that I hire, come from that particular background. And the reality is that's just the way in which I grew up. So I understand why I'm doing what it is that I'm doing. And so I want my businesses to have the same impact that Dr. Gaston's businesses had on one of the most thoroughly segregated cities in America.
You really are a living representation of the legacy of the people we talked about and what Black Enterprise is about. So again, for someone who ran the magazine for 13 years, who's been at Black Enterprise for more than 35 years, this is really an amazing conversation for me personally. The other thing I appreciate about your story, well, let me say this: I always tell the people I mentor and my audience, people who just care about business biographies are just so powerful. I mean, we've heard about, why should white guys have all this fun, and Black Titan, and there's so many others. I mean, in fact, Eddie Brown has a book. I can't call out the name of the book, but I read it and reviewed it. I have all these books you see back here is somebody's biography because I believe
Right.
in them. Because when you think that you're either facing a problem or a challenge that's nobody ever faced or that they've never overcome, and you talked about the challenge you had with even putting together the financing, how many years it took from the time you first had interest and
Hmm.
all that article to the time you actually were able to work out. this deal for Fuddruckers, and that was years, and
Yes.
times when either directly or indirectly you were told really this is not really for you, and it just reminded me when you read Why Should White Guys Have All the Fun, all the drama and the stress and strain of Reggie Lewis's journey till he ultimately got the big deal that made him the icon that he is today. And so I tell people, yeah, it's good to read, articles on, now online.
Mhm.
It's good to read, to be inspired by a tweet or a post on Instagram or Twitter. But there's
Yes.
something about the story of someone that you admire who accomplished something, and to really see everything that he went through that not only gives you a reality check about what you're trying to accomplish, but also in those times when you think you can't make it, you look back on it. Like I said, A.G. Gaston, who did it when there was no
Right.
such thing as minority set asides, there was no such thing as affirmative
No.
action, there was no such thing as an 8A program for minority
That's
businesses.
right.
There was none of that. And we're not saying that
Mhm.
things are easy today, but you're
Sure.
right. If you could do what he did in the 1930s, like you said, World Wars, Great Depression, Jim Crow. I mean,
Yes.
you're right. You look at that and you say, listen, it is tough, but it can be
Yeah.
done. It can be done.
It can be done. It should be done, and it just gave me a great appreciation for what economic power really can do. I think I established a entrepreneurship and leadership development institute for students as an internship, and that internship takes place in Birmingham, and we took a group of students there to teach them what I consider to be the why, so that they can understand that many of the programs that exist were born out of the African American Civil Rights Movement. A lot of people don't know that. Many of the small minority business programs and Office of Small Disadvantaged Business Utilization, MBDA, all of those were born, out of what centrally happened in Birmingham. And, we have to understand our history, and we have to understand why economics is important. And I did a panel the other day at Miles College there. We picked up the food services contract at Miles, and this is our first semester there in that partnership. And I talked to the group about the Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the race riots there, and that African American ecosystem that existed there that represented just so much economic power and freedom for our people. It was really the blueprint, in my opinion, for our people to understand how to be able to really bring about social changes through the power of wealth. And so I don't know any other way to narrow the racial wealth gap in America other than through entrepreneurship. I've never really seen our tax structure restructured for the benefit of poor and disenfranchised and marginalized people. I've never seen that done before. I don't know this ever been done in the history of America. Reality is that we do have access to entrepreneurship, and really and truly, it was in a certain period of time. I think because we were forced into it. The way for our people. I think that through affirmative action, in some instances, the focus was on getting us into corporate America and, going out and getting a job and so on and so forth. But when you look at the holistic legacy of the racial wealth gap in America, it hasn't done much to narrow that gap. It continues to grow. And I think that entrepreneurship truly is the way for Black and Brown communities to deal with the issue of wealth inequality in America.
I'm constantly, telling my audience and telling anybody who listen that they should watch the documentary. It's called Boss: The Black Experience in
Yes,
Business.
yes. So you were there
Um,
on
yeah,
that.
I had the pleasure of being one of the experts on it
That's
because
right.
it really tells the story that, among other things, that every time we made progress, and then, of course, we make progress, then we get pushed back. We make progress, we get pushed back. But every time we moved forward, there was some aspect of us getting a foothold in entrepreneurship and wealth creation that allowed us to move forward, even if there was some pushback afterwards. And so I tell people, you look at the pattern, this understanding that whatever else happened, yes, electing black mayors, yes, getting black people in corporate America in positions of power in corporate America, that all of those things, have a cumulative effect. But the common thread over time, over the centuries, over the decades, was to a degree whether we used entrepreneurship to buy our freedom, out of bondage, or we used it
Like
to
that.
build communities like Tulsa and other, and of course,
Hmm.
Black Wall Street and Tulsa wasn't the only community like that around the country.
Right.
Or today, when we look at black entrepreneurs, like you said, creating jobs, delivering economic impact. And to your point, Black Enterprise was founded in 1970. That wasn't coincidental. That was also a direct outgrowth because the original idea that our late founder Earl Graves Sr. had for what became Black Enterprise was, for the first time, there were these federal entities. NBDA was originally the Office of Minority Business Development, but there were these
Yes.
entities that that were resources that black people wouldn't know about. And he's like, we need to create a vehicle that informs black people in Chicago, Detroit, Birmingham, who before never looked to Washington for any kind of help from business. But if they don't know about these resources, they're not going to avail themselves of the resources, and that was what eventually evolved into Black Enterprise. So you're right. You look at
Yes.
that legacy, and people really do need to understand that to see how we got to where we are today in terms of Black business and Black entrepreneurship.
That's right.
I do want to make a highlight that you teach.
Yes.
You're not just you're doing it. You teach it, and you
Right.
have an MBA from Howard.
Do.
Yeah, your HBCU credentials bona
That's
fide
right.
for real.
That's right. And and I teach, and I was just so happy when they asked me to do that because I knew that, and it connected me on another level with this generation, and they are entrepreneurial. They want to be economically independent. They understand the importance of it, and I just teach them this blue ocean strategy thinking methodology. I mean, it is a book that I had come across, and it was something that was just so powerful to find and create and innovate beyond the existing market. And we've found examples and ways to be able to turn or even a red ocean blue, right? By improving upon an existing technology or product or service that could separate you from your competitors. Just that way of thinking, right? And these it's a very tough concept, but these students grasped it. And if you could see some of the ideas that they were able to come up with and ways to be disruptive, even in existing marketplaces. It was just dynamic, and it was one of the most beneficial and rewarding experiences that I'd had. And Fuddruckers, of course, took me out of the classroom because of, this is a very heavy lift. But the reality is that I'm going to continue to do that, but just maybe remotely. But I want to stay connected with this generation. But I wanted them to better understand why the community needs it. Because many people go out and start businesses, and it can be in some instances for just self-seeking reasons, right? I mean, wealth and wealth creation is very important individually and for families and all of that stuff. But the community needs to be lifted up. I think every generation of people must do something to help to move our community forward. And I just believe that the entrepreneur, the African American entrepreneur, should play a more vital role in advancing our people. Than a lot of the things that I've seen happen over the past 20 or 30 years.
I totally agree with you on a couple of points about what you just said. I do again.
Hmm.
Do a lot of mentoring over the years. I've had the pleasure of serving as a mentor to many young Black entrepreneurs, primarily because of just the things that I've learned and experienced over my time at Black Enterprise. I'm currently a mentor in Pharrell Williams' Black Ambition, one of the
Awesome.
Black Ambition members, a really inspiring young group of 6 entrepreneurs that I'm working with. And I am really, whenever I look for bright spots in even these challenging times, you could say the post-COVID era, the post, George Floyd era, one of the brightest spots that I see is when you talk to, Gen X, more Gen Y, millennials, Gen Zs. They're leaning into this entrepreneurship thing. They're leaning into wealth creation through investment. They want to know this stuff that I remember, my generation and my parents' generation kind of, they really didn't want to have those conversations and really focus on it. And I
Hmm.
think it really bodes well for our future. So yeah, I really, really am encouraged, and I'm glad that see the same thing in the young people
Hmm.
we're encountering. That we have a generation that is ready to be poured into in a way that
Yeah.
maybe we haven't seen in recent years, and now it's really we have to lean into
Yes.
to giving them the information and the support and the encouragement to move forward, so they'll do things that will make what we're doing now pale by comparison if we do this right.
Absolutely.
So that's a good opportunity to kind of pivot to talking about the present and the future. And you talked about your challenges with doing something that still is extraordinary, but people need to understand that you face those challenges in terms of once you see an opportunity, um, how do you capitalize that opportunity? And it speaks to everything around economic equity, particularly when we talk about sources of capital for Black founders who have just as brilliant an idea, just they have a vision. You opened up by saying you are a visionary.
Hmm.
You didn't stumble or stutter when you said that, and and obviously we have a way to go with the progress that we've made since A.G. Gaston. We still have a way to go in terms of really creating avenues of economic equity and access to capital in particular that will grow businesses of scale, and whether that's growing them organically, but really growing them. We look at, say the Facebooks of the world that, was allowed to grow to what it is today, or whether we're talking about yourself, Reggie Lewis, that has the capital to acquire assets and then to bring the value to make those assets grow and more valuable to the marketplace. Um,
Yes.
Talk to me, broad, kind of the broad overview, and then we can kind of drill down on some of the things you think we need to focus on
Sure.
around this idea of creating pathways of economic equity for Black entrepreneurs and Black founders.
Well, I think it starts with access to capital. I was having a conversation on Saturday with a venture capitalist, and we were just talking about this whole subject of mergers and acquisitions, and it becoming more prevalent in as a way to get into business for African Americans. Buying an existing business that has already matured past certain phases because the subject that still exists that first 3 to 5 years a business makes it past 5 years they can make it, so on and so forth. But our people very find it very difficult to dream beyond the resources that we currently control. That's really the first step in the entrepreneurial process, but the reality is for many of our people, we're just trying to get through the now, right? Because of our economic circumstances. And I think we first have to deal with that, right? I feel like, and this is just personally, that we have some instances where there are some banks that are managing discrimination. It may very well be knowingly or unknowingly, right? Very similar to how real estate agents in the '60s were managing discrimination because they control the movement of people. If you did not access to capital and financing to qualified minorities and businesses, you're complicit in the problem, right? And many people that I know that are qualified business people who have assets find it just extremely difficult to get the resources they need just to be able to get the things that they need to for like payroll, inventory, things of that nature, that just basic finance and operating lines of credit. I mean, it's incredible. Some of the circumstances that people are dealing with, even those that are government contractors, that the government, receivables is just as sure receivable you can ever deal with. People are still, as government contractors, finding it difficult to get a 30-day float for operating, even in those circumstances. And I just think it's just it's just incredible. And I have encouraged in several conversations that I've had recently in roundtables in a fireside chat with the Deputy Secretary of Commerce that our government really should consider doing direct loans. If this problem continues to persist, I believe that there should be alternative ways to be able to deploy capital to small women and minority owned businesses. And even if it becomes an instance where our government does those loans directly through the SBA and model the United States Department of Agriculture and their ability to be able to do direct lending. And so I think the mechanisms are there. I think it's just whether or not the want to is there, whether it's politically expedient enough to to have the discussion. But it's just a matter of fact that our businesses are struggling. We know also that minority-owned banks sometimes may be risk averse to business lending because of their undercapitalization in some instances, right? That we seeing now a lot of political goodwill going out, to minority banks. But what we have been able to get has been because of the minority banks that we have. But it's still a very heavy lift, and we continue to. You hear it, you see it on conferences, and everybody's talking about it all the time. Access to capital, leveling the playing field, providing, but we still are struggling with the same issues and the same circumstances. So it's got to be something else thrown at the issue. And so I think in order for us to really have equity, we got to solve for this lack of access to financing and lack of access to capital to start and to manage and to grow our businesses. And because, a lot of times people will allow the circumstances that they don't control to prevent them from ideating. And the vision never gets off the ground because the first thing that you hear people say all the time is, I don't have the money. Well, where am I going to get, and then, and it does, it has an adverse impact on your ability to be able to create, to think creatively. Is this really the most effective use of my time if I develop this magnificent business plan and, not going to be able to get access to the financing that I need in order to be able to get it off the ground? And I just think that that is just not the way that it should be. America really and truly is a land of opportunity, even for someone like me who grew up in just impoverished circumstances. I started Perkins Management with $2,000 and an American Express card.
Wow.
So, and then to see the company grow into what it is today, and then our ability to be able to. So I know that it's possible, but I look at myself in the mirror and I look at 41, how gray my beard is, and I wonder to myself, was it really supposed to be this hard?
Right, right.
And so, wow, and then I think about whether or not, if other people are going to be willing to sacrifice and put in that much work to keep it going for the community like I did, right? And I just want the road to be a little easier for those that are coming behind me, and I'm concerned, I really am, that if we don't deal with the problem of capital access, that I'm not sure if we will reach our fullest potential as it pertains to true minority business development from an equity standpoint if we don't.
We talk about whether whether it's intentional or unintentional.
Hmm.
It almost doesn't matter. It's like
Right.
whether somebody really wanted to run you over with their car or they hit you by accident. It doesn't really matter. And
That's right.
we saw on writ large during the COVID shutdown, what happens when there's unintended, whether it's unintended consequences or intended consequences, when a
Yes.
system implements a program that is supposed to help in small disadvantaged business in particular, but as of helping the people who need it the least, at least that first round of PPP loans, it was like
Yeah.
the people, but it was the people who already were connected, who the system was built to serve, who already had
Yep.
the banking relationships, and once again, without some intentionality around the barriers that
Hmm.
have been built into the system, in this case, for minority and Black entrepreneurs, then you're going to do something you think is helping, but is usually, often not. And so there really does need to be a certain amount of intentionality if you're really going to move the needle. And we've interviewed venture capital founders, both Black firms and non-Black firms on this show, and it's always, my audience kind of knows this from listening to the show, but when we were talking about just the gap in venture capital funding, the high in 2021 of 1.3%, not just for Black people, but for Blacks, Latinos, women, only 1.3% of venture capital funding to all of those, again, underrepresented groups. That's the gap that you're trying to
Yeah.
close. You're not talking about throwing 10 million here and 20 million there. You're talking about a
Hmm.
lot more money. To
That's
the
right.
average person, a $15 million fund to help finance Black owned or Latinx or other businesses is a lot. But when you
Hmm.
look at the numbers, it's good, but it's nibbling
Yes,
around the edges of the problem. It's not really
that's right.
attacking the larger issues around true capital access and moving the needle in a way that really needs to be moved.
Absolutely.
You talk about the political appetite for these conversations, in this case around economic equity and capital access for Black founders. And now we're in the age of DEI and companies
Hmm.
really, and I can think of a lot of several companies who are literally putting money out, starting funds, backing and programs and initiatives to try to at least turn the tide and have a tipping point versus, let's say, pre-COVID versus post-COVID.
Yes.
From your view, both as a expert observer, an educator in the space, and an entrepreneur who, like you said, you achieved the milestone in acquiring Fuddruckers, but your capital needs didn't go away; they're expanding
That's right.
because you got
Yes,
to
they are
operate the
expanding.
company, you got to grow the
Right.
company, you got to maintain the company, you got to strengthen the company.
Absolutely.
So
Mhm.
talk to me about what you're seeing, if anything, in terms of the difference, say 3 years ago to now. Now, I will have a certain bias. I think we're headed in the right direction. There's a reason for cautious optimism, but it's about what's going to happen in a sustained way. What are you seeing? What are you experiencing as a founder?
I echo you in being cautiously optimistic, because I know that there were significant multi-billion-dollar promises that were made, and I think that that reconciliation needs to be done to determine how much of that actually materialized. I have not seen much in the way of access to capital deployment for minority businesses increase, exponentially in that respect. Most of the minority business people that I know are still confronted with the same challenges. Although I acquired a company that has a over 40-year, legacy brand, it's still a 1-year-old company for me, right? And so we still have those same challenges. Oh, well, we need 24 months worth of operating activities. We need 2 years worth of tax returns. Blah 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 blah. So all of these hurdles still exist. We just make a way out of no way. Reality is that we just find a way to make it work, like always, right? We do more with less. We have been masters of that. You look across the legacy of Black people in America, we've always done more with less. And this is no different than any other example of what you see, that we have just been able to survive, right? You look at our companies, the majority of them are undercapitalized. We figure out a way to make it work, right? Is it fair? No, right? Does the fact that we've been able to grow, maintain, and sustain, like I said, I've given birth to an 18-year-old, so to speak, in Perkins management. And then you look at the fact that we've endured and withstood so much, right, as a company, starting with nothing, literally ground zero, into growing it in the manner in which we have, still, even today, not having that true financial partnership and relationship that I feel like we deserve, even as a company, because of the market that we serve. People were afraid of food businesses because of COVID, prior to all of the funding and everything else that came down from the federal government and other goodwill that came from philanthropy to HBCUs. People were afraid to get involved with them, right? For HBCUs were a risk for in many people's eyes because the food service contract typically is the largest contract on campus. As a result of that, people felt like the receivables would fall and lag, and I mean it's just incredible, right?
Mm.
Circumstances that and perceptions that people had around HBCUs and in the minority community. I mean, so we figure out a way to make it work, right? We figure out a way to persist and figure out a way to make it happen. But even for me and other minorities, we've got to find, there has to be a more excellent way to get to, this parity as it pertains to access to capital for minority-owned businesses that have grown beyond a certain point. And I told Undersecretary Cravens in several conversations when he and I speak about, we really should just go to the government and ask the government to consider putting a vehicle together to do direct lending. I really do. And I don't feel like it's to the benefit of the minority business community for these large banks to have a blank check as it pertains to the application of SBA loan guarantees when they are not equitably distributing them among small women and minority, especially owned businesses. And so the reality is that since sometimes they don't even recognize the SBA loan guarantee as collateral.
Wow.
Hey, this is a very loaded, subject as it pertains to some of the things that people are really seeing out here as it pertains to access, to capital. And I just feel like, that our bank should be held a little bit more accountable to our government for minority business lending.
Yeah, I mean, I share your sentiment around banks being held more accountable about what government should and could be doing, and even I'll extend it to what corporate America should be doing to the degree you referenced. There's a whole bunch of pledges, and
Hmm.
when I have these conversations, particularly with corporate executives who are on the side of trying to do something about this, and they talk about the money they're putting aside, the money they're putting toward it. And I said, if you're emphasizing the amount of money you're putting, or you're putting the emphasis on the wrong, as my boss Earl Grey Jr. would say, on the wrong syllable. That
Okay.
the issue is not a lack of capital. The issue is lack of access. And when you talk about
Yeah.
lack of access, it's the methods and the systems of distribution that create barriers, not access.
Yes.
And so when you talk about a direct, lending program to minority businesses, you're talking about creating a new avenue of access. We're talking about changing the
Absolutely.
systems because
Yep.
there's money sitting around.
Hmm.
We're talking about
Hmm.
there's plenty of capital per se,
Sure.
but there's not avenues of we're not even saying easy access. We're saying fair access
Yes.
that in this case, black-owned business can reliably access capital. And like you said, once you know you have access to capital, that does unleash a certain amount of creativity and innovation
Sure.
because now more is possible.
That's right.
No sense in me thinking about things that are not possible
That's
when you're
right.
telling me this is the box that I got to play in. And so
That's right.
therefore, there's no way I'm going to create the next Amazon. There's no way I'm going
That's
to connect the next Google because I don't have access to the kind of capital to even make that dream come true. Even if I can imagine it in my head and I have the technological capability to pull it off.
right. Absolutely.
So I really do want to get your thoughts. As
Hmm.
our time kind of runs down
Sure.
on the importance of communicating both to the private sector and to your point to the government entities that it really has to be a reimagining of the system of capital distribution that takes into account the unique needs of minority, black-owned businesses, and other underrepresented business models. For a simple example, if you're um, even a significantly sized black-owned business, um, you still may need more favorable payment terms than a majority business.
Absolutely.
That the idea we're all going to have the same payment terms and that's fair. Is it really?
Go.
When you know that a majority business is far better capitalized, like you said, can go
Mhm.
much longer before they get their payments than
Sure.
that even the largest black-owned business can afford to do. And that means it
Hmm.
can't be a one-size-fits-all. Again, we are talking about systemic adjustments that takes into account these issues, and that's about more than how much money is available. Or we put more money into a black bank. We put more money into a minority venture capital fund. It doesn't mean anything if I have as much of a challenge getting to that money before as I do now, even though there's more money to get.
Absolutely. And you hit the nail on the head. I mean, the reality is that that it obviously is not working, right? The the existing infrastructure, the formula that's being able to use to determine company A versus company B is eligible, and all of those things that they utilize right now as benchmarks assumes that everybody has the same starting point,
I
right? And the reality is that we don't. And people's and we do need special considerations, right? As a result of you know how all of this quote unquote capital stack, and the all of these the things that go into making a decision, a go no go decision, right, in terms of whether or not your business is going to be approved for financing. I mean, we do need people to pay very close attention to how minority businesses are qualified, and I think that it is going to take that, and I think our government should take the first step in reimagining, how lending should be done to the minority business community for certain. Because we all don't start at the same place, we don't, and so the circumstances are different. Even how you say your suppliers, and supply partners deal with you. They know what minority businesses are dealing with out here. They're not gonna go but so far,
mhm.
right? You know what I mean? They're not gonna give you the kind of credit terms that they're gonna give to a majority business as a result of the fact that that they don't want to take on the same amount of risk, right? You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
so it's just a trickle down effect that I don't think people fully understand, that we're dealing with out here. It's and we're fighting the fight every day, and it is a very heavy lift, and we need support in order to be able to keep this economic engine going. Because when you think about, what we're doing and the contributions that minority businesses are making to the American economy, helping our nation to be able to maintain its competitive advantage over all of the other countries in the world, a lot of that innovation and wherewithal and community development is coming from the minority business community.
true.
Yet we are the most undercapitalized and disenfranchised group, and it's just simply not fair, right? And so America is the strongest, most powerful, most wealthy nation in the world, and we're making significant contributions to for our nation to be able to say that, and which is why I go back to our government doing more to make sure that we have the resources that we need in order to be able to grow. Now, imagine if the discrimination didn't exist. How many more A.G. Gastons, how many more Reginald Lewis's there would be? How many more Madam C.J. Walkers there would be? We won't be able to just point to 4 or 5 people in our community that reached that level if that amount of discrimination did not exist, right? And it's there. And those of us who are, fighting to you know, to make a difference and to build sustainable enterprises in that was going to live on in perpetuity. We need access to capital, and I'd like to see our government take steps to be able to do some direct lending and take some of these what I call conveniences away from some of the larger banks when they are not being held accountable for how much are you lending to the minority business community. It should almost be a requirement, just like the government requires itself to, to contract a certain amount of, their contract should go to, small women, minority, disadvantaged. They should set goals and be required to set goals. If you kill the data, if there's no data, if the banks are not required to keep data on what I call socioeconomic data,
Right.
and say, okay, this number of applicants came in, of this percentage of applications that came in, this many were African Americans, and we approved or denied this many. How will we know? Other than hearing people like me saying, everybody that I know is going around saying that they can't get a loan from A, B, or C bank, right? And we can't prove the discrimination if the data doesn't exist, right? So we really should require that they that they start keeping track of that in order for them to be, to be held accountable for what I know is discrimination.
Well, in so many cases, they keep track of it, but they're not required to reveal it.
I see.
And just as we've heard the adage, what gets measured gets done, the opposite
Mm,
is also true. What you
I
don't have
see.
the data to support does not get done.
Right.
And the easiest way to kill almost any initiative is either not gather the data or to gather the data but not release the data.
Hmm.
And we're in obviously a data-driven economy, and that's going to be even more so as we move deeper into the 21st century.
Yes.
Listen, Nicholas, this has been such a great pleasure, and obviously these are going to be ongoing conversations, both on Beyond the Hype and in general, because obviously we're not going to solve all the problems of this topic in an hour-long conversation.
Yes.
But in the time we have remaining, I really wanted you to kind of bring our audience up to speed of where you are and what your goals are for your businesses now. What should we be looking for? How do we keep it, keep it, following what you're doing?
Yes.
And I don't know if I got to see what Fuddruckers are near where I live because I
Yes.
only seem to get them when I go out to the Midwest somewhere. But maybe I'm just
Right.
not. I need to be more intentional.
Yeah, well, thank you. So the goal right now for us is to continue to market and advocate and grow in the HBCU space in contract food services management. On the Fuddrucker side, we're going to continue to reestablish our internal infrastructure and look to begin to reselling franchises in 2023. It's been a very, like I said, a very heavy lift
Mhm.
coming in and improving upon, and in some instances, establishing internal controls, processes, and procedures to shore up our internal infrastructure to be able to sustain the type of growth that we want to have as a franchisor,
Right.
and going about it the right way. So a lot of it has been around data analytics, uh, determining and benchmarking what are the best practices in the industry as it pertains to marketing, advertising, franchise sales as we began to move in toward that direction. And I just been looking under the hood for the past 12 months. So, we've done quite a bit, and we're going to actively start seeking for franchisees in 2023. And so we're very excited about that. We got a ton of interest from, just so many people wanting to become franchisees. And my goal is to make sure that our company reflects our customer base in terms of ownership and equity. So, we want a lot of small women and minority owned businesses to participate. And we want to make sure that we are the example that we want to see. And so, I want to, kind of really set the standard for how a diverse franchise organization should look like. And that's the advantage that I have as being a franchisor, is that I get to set the pace as it pertains to that. So I'm very excited about the opportunity to be more inclusive in franchising with my organization now, it being my organization now, and now we can go out and began to get more people involved in business ownership, and I'm very excited and delighted about that.
Well, Nicholas, you're doing the legacy of people like Eddie Brown, Reginald Lewis, Herman J. Russell, of
Yeah.
course, A.G. Gaston,
Yes.
Adam C.J. Walker proud. We
Thank
definitely
you.
want to, stand on top of what you're doing. Keep us posted on both sides of your business.
Yes.
Obviously, the HBCU space and Fuddruckers, both of those spaces are critical
Yes.
economic engines for Black business growth and Black wealth creation. So,
Yes.
listen, I really, really appreciate you taking the time to join me on this episode of Beyond the Hype.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
And this has been yet another great edition of Beyond the Hype. This episode is brought to you by Nationwide. I'm Alfred Edmond Jr., Senior VP, Executive Editor at Large at Black Enterprise. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time.